All right, so our main people who will be leading the live stream today are Michi and Talia. They're both product designers from Stripe, and they will be the ones talking about how they have approached annual planning with their teams. So I will kick it off to them.
Hey, one moment. Okay.
All right. So thanks, Figma team. We're really excited to be here today. And as Anna mentioned, we're going to be talking about how design sprints are used for annual planning. But first, an intro about myself. I'm Michi.
And I'm Talia, and we're product designers at Stripe. Now, Michi, we can probably guess what they're thinking, right? Designers leading planning? Come on.
No way. That always ends up in products lab. And we're pleased to share, actually, no, not anymore. As we all know, we're professionals at making really good looking rectangles and moving them around.
But today, we're here to let you in on a little secret. There's life outside the rectangle. Today, we're going to share how designers can play as much, if not more, of a role in the strategy and planning for your team. Pixel pushers? Not us. But before we share our secrets, we'll tell you a little bit about Stripe and what we work on there.
For those who don't know, Stripe is a financial services and payments company. Online payments processing for internet businesses is our jam. We're available all over the world, and companies of all sizes use our products to accept payments, send payouts, and manage their businesses online.
As product designers, we help shape how the end users will interact with the various products that Stripe puts out. So we work specifically on a product called Stripe Express, which is built to address the financial needs of solo professionals or people who work for themselves and earn money from multiple places online. An example of a solo pro could be a journalist who hosts a podcast for Spotify while also writing a newsletter on Substack and maybe teaches an online course on Teachable. But let's get back to the initial secret we said we'd let you in on: planning.
We get that a lot of what we're going to talk about today will look like a design sprint, and it is. Design sprints are super valuable. On the outside, it looks like your standard design sprint, but in reality, it's kind of the perfect tool for team-wide planning.
So, okay, we know what you're thinking. Designers leading a design sprint, groundbreaking, right? But what got us there wasn't actually a desire to make these sweeping design changes. Instead, we saw that a design sprint could be the path to get people planning in an inclusive and collaborative way.
So what were we going through before the design sprint? We were in the midst of 2022 planning, but we didn't seem to have a clear vision on what we were working towards for the upcoming year. Some of the product ideas mentioned weren't directly tied to user needs, and we were struggling to properly explain what Express was. We felt like decisions were more reactive than proactive.
And on top of all of that, we ran into the thing that so many people fear: a reorg. Now, again, you may be wondering, why on earth would we want to be involved in planning? There are so many more interesting things to do as product designers, like maybe talking to users or building prototypes or going deep on interaction and motion details.
But it's important that design not only have a seat at the table, but that they actually sit at that seat at the table when they have it. And in that case, it means being deeply involved with planning where important long-term decisions are made. Planning is not just for PMs, it's for everyone. No one wants to spend a quarter working on things that they're not excited about or that isn't impactful for the user. We felt that design was uniquely positioned to help facilitate these important conversations in a user-centric way.
So we ran into that fire, and with the help of a design sprint, the team got back on track and aligned. Now, how did we do this, you may ask? Here are some things we learned from our sprint that we think could apply to you and your teams. The first insight: Despite the name, design sprints aren't actually about design. The purpose of a design sprint is actually team alignment. Design acts as the guide through which you validate ideas and also brainstorm and question whether those are the right ideas to include in your roadmap.
Let's be real though. Validating ideas and getting people on board is hard, and that's why partnering cross-functionally is critical. We were really lucky to have supportive partners, product partners, who eagerly promoted and encouraged the sprint that we had in mind and wanted us to take the lead. So forget about sprints only including designers. Everyone's able to be creative and everyone's able to be user-focused. And by including people in other disciplines, everyone can be part of the fun.
Now, we know that in this specific instance, we were pretty lucky because our cross-functional partners were open to this idea, but plenty of you out there don't have that. In fact, we're sure many of you even have partners that don't think it's needed. So how do you handle it then? First, you do need to ask yourself the difficult question. Do they have a point? Do they not want to sprint because it's not necessary at the moment, or because they need to prioritize other things? As we know, design is always eager to do North Star work, so it's important to know when it's the right time to do it.
So when is the right time to get involved in planning? If your team is unable to explain how the projects on your roadmap fit together, that could be one indicator. Confusion over long-term goals could be another. And if you notice that user needs don't come up during planning, that's a pretty good indicator too. Another suggestion could be word choice. Yes, it could be as simple as the framing of your suggestion. For example, rather than referring to our sprint as a 2022 North Star, we called it a 2022 design synthesis when we shared it more broadly. Sometimes word choice can surprisingly be key in making people more receptive to the idea.
Our next insight: stop, collaborate, and listen, and then plan. And by this, we mean before you schedule a sprint, before you come up with all of the sprint activities, before you send out invites, collaborate with your colleagues over what you have in mind. This can ensure that everyone has the same expectations going in around sprint goals and deliverables. But don't get us wrong, this certainly was not all rainbows and unicorns on our end. We actually did stumble through this a bit personally. At the start of planning, Michie and I dove right in and we got overly excited. Let's do a 4-year vision sprint. This will be so cool. We can think so far ahead. But as soon as we shared out a doc with some of our partners, they told us we were jumping way too far ahead. We were a new team that had just had a reorg, and we were working on a new product. What we needed was an illustrated direction for the upcoming year.
So we went back to square one and we updated the dates, the goals, the deliverables to only reflect a time frame for 2022. And because we shared this broadly with the attendees that we planned on inviting, we got to hear their feedback and learn where there was confusion or concern.
For instance, many of the people we invited had different ideas of what the output of the sprint would look like. Some people were expecting pixel perfect final designs for all of 2022. Others had no idea what to expect. So this did lead us to hold more explicit conversations as a team about what the expectations should be for the end of the sprint. Other feedback we got was that the time that was needed from the team would just be too much. So we wound up reducing the entire sprint from 2 weeks down to 1, given that feedback.
Because we collaborated on a straightforward doc with our coworkers before any serious planning occurred, we were able to create a successful sprint that really worked for our team's specific challenges and goals. And what our team needed was an opportunity to get to know each other and the work. But alignment goes both ways. And that leads us to insight 3. If you want a design sprint to be a successful tool for planning, you have to design it with your specific teammates in mind. Oftentimes, the challenge can be time. Everyone's got their own projects, everyone's got their own priorities, and everyone's got their own meetings to attend.
The challenge of finding time in the calendar for everyone to come together has basically become a meme at this point. And once you find that time, then making sure everyone can focus entirely on the task at hand, especially while remote, that is nearly impossible. So we knew this would be a challenge from the start. And as a result, we made it so that anyone could drop in on any workshop and meaningfully contribute, even if they weren't present for the other activities. Now, the extra busy teammates could scan the agendas and decide which workshop was most relevant given their availability and interest. And we also kept each workshop to no more than an hour and a half, because after a certain point, as we've all experienced, eyes tend to glaze over and people start multitasking, especially when you're on Zoom.
Of course, an hour and a half is still a really long time. But the truth is, having less time can actually be an amazing constraint that allows people to be creative and focused. A lot can come out of 30 minutes huddled with your team around a whiteboard, virtual or otherwise. So once we had determined the right timing for each workshop and all the prepping and the planning was checked off, we transitioned from being planners to facilitators. Our jobs were to tease out and reinforce the value and the merit of every person's ideas, regardless of that person's role or seniority.
And once the team's creative juices started flowing, we asked each person to describe what their long-term vision of what Express could be in the future. And we grouped people into teams and asked them to imagine what a successful launch article could look like for Express 1 year from now. This really got us as a team to zoom out and highlight the values that mattered most without getting too fixated on the nitty-gritty details or specific feature work.
And then once themes emerged, we allowed people to cast votes on the ones that resonated most. We set up photos and designated voting dots for every participant, and this reinforced that everyone had a say. Instead of favoring the loudest voices in the room, we enabled everyone to contribute equally. But we couldn't only focus on high-level directions, we also needed to focus on user needs. As we mentioned before, we had just been through a reorg, and so many folks were new to the team in the product areas. They needed to be onboarded onto a product and get acquainted with the problems that we were solving for.
We realized that this would actually be the perfect time for teammates to work together to learn the user needs and pain points of their new focus areas. So we divided the attendees up by their new sub-teams. We had them map out the steps of their user's current journey, and then we asked them to identify the spots that caused friction or frustration for the user.
From there, we had them identify opportunities based on the pain points that they uncovered and to brainstorm ideas with no limitations on how to solve them.
So this exercise did two things for us. For one, it validated that the new teams formed from the reorg mapped pretty perfectly to the user needs, which was really great. But two, the ideas that came out of this exercise ended up directly informing our team's mission and roadmap.
Now, we know what often happens is that a sprint can take place, everyone has a good time, and then it kind of slips through the cracks. Nowhere to be found, not especially on the roadmap. Which leads me to the last and final insight. The key to getting the word out and making this entire effort worthwhile and turning the ideas into reality is socializing and celebrating the work your team has done.
Unfortunately, because we are now living in a largely remote first world, you will need to create something that is easily shareable and that can live on its own without you being there to explain. So after the sprint, Michie and I created a visual deck that detailed why we did the sprint, what the synthesized product vision looked like for Express in 2022, and crucially, how it tied back into Stripe's broader business goals. We did make designs to illustrate the vision, but we intentionally kept them low fidelity so that the focus really remained on the strategic direction.
We announced this to our broader teams in the form of a shipped email. And then before we knew it, the team was buzzing about this new direction and how to build it. And this also kickstarted conversations with our partner teams. And in general, it became an example of a more collaborative way to plan.
But sadly, planning is never done. You need to keep challenging and revisiting the work you've landed on. As we know with design, we should never treat any work too preciously, as hard as it may be for us recovering perfectionists out there. So once we landed at our 2022 product vision, we ran a workshop to identify assumptions, unknowns, and risks. As we just mentioned, the direction that we landed on was only that first pass. We did not know everything, and it was critical to identify what needed more exploration and validation. And what came out of that was that these open-ended questions became the priorities for our research roadmap.
So we know that was a lot of talking, scheduling, and planning. And some of you might be saying to yourselves, what if I don't have the capacity to do this on my own? So in that case, enlist your non-designer teammates. When I was in a startup, I was the only designer, but I convinced my PM to lead it with me. Remember, a design sprint is not just about design, and planning is for everyone.
So what happened at the end of our sprint? We came out with a better sense of how everyone's work was connected. We had real proof that design could drive strategy in a collaborative and user-focused way. We were able to identify clear areas of focus for each of the sub-teams. And we found new opportunities to improve the product for our users. But we know that throughout this presentation, we've been talking a lot about designers. So do not worry, our cross-functional partners, we see you too. Here are some ways you can help.
So for our product managers out there, promote and encourage design-led sprints in the team. Non-designers will look to you to determine whether an activity like this is valuable for people in other verticals.
Engineers, definitely attend the sessions and participate. Bubble up any big engineering initiatives that may impact the user experience and work in advance with design to incorporate it into these working sessions.
Design managers, encourage your reports to involve themselves in planning and provide air cover so that they're able to step away from their tactical day-to-day tasks.
Now, we know that Stripe is a particular type of environment, and it may not be the one that matches your company or your environment. So designing a sprint for roadmap planning will differ a lot if you're at a later stage company or a startup.
So at a startup, gathering stakeholders may not be the problem since there aren't too many people. You really can involve everyone. So there's no need to be so formal in your planning. You can do a whiteboard session in a room with your team. You can also do a sprint for just the upcoming month if 6 to 12 months feels too long.
And if you're at a mature company, you really need to be ruthless about who to invite so that the sprint doesn't become too crowded. You'll need to be sure to invite and win the proper stakeholders, of course, but whereas in a startup, your only stakeholder could be the CEO, in a big company, you could have many stakeholders in a variety of areas. So it's really important that you'll identify who is the most essential during planning.
And that's it. That is the secret sauce. So to review, design sprints aren't just about design. Stop, collaborate, and listen, and then plan. The team informs the sprint. And finally, socialize and celebrate the work that your team has done. We hope that you can try out the tips that we've shared and that you can bask in this new life outside the rectangle.
So if what we shared today excites you, you should come and join us at Stripe and help improve what product planning looks like in teams around the world. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michie and Talia. This was super insightful, and it was really great to see how you guys approached your entire process and edited your strategy as you received feedback from other people that you were getting involved. So now we can move on to the Q&A portion. So If anyone has any questions that they would like answered, please pop them into the Q&A. We'll be using this to reference and ask questions for the next around 10 to 15 minutes. So, first question, either of you could answer this, but someone was wondering, how do you buy in stakeholders to use design sprints outside of design occasion?
Yeah, I can speak to this. And so my understanding of the question is like, how do we get stakeholders to invest in design sprints outside of just using it for design? I think that the first thing you do is just like, as Talia mentioned, you really just have to be really aligned with the people. So before you do anything, you got to talk to your teammates and like make sure that they're on board and understand what a design sprint can give to them. If they're not really aware of what a design sprint is, maybe like a week of a design sprint is too much of a commitment. And so what you can do is like work up to that by maybe doing like a 1-hour sprint or a 1-day thing. And then they can start to see the process and the creativity that comes out of it. And then you kind of work them up to a longer 1-week thing. But it's not just like 0 to 1 real quick. You gotta really like build the trust with your XFN partners and then really start to like show them what a design sprint or these like design kind of frameworks can do.
Awesome. And there's a couple of questions. I'm going to tie them together because they're very similar, but some people were wondering how you would go about with this, implementing this for agencies or people who are freelancing and working with clients.
Yeah, in that instance, the same rules can apply with your clients. You can get together with your clients to ensure that you're perfectly aligned on what their vision is, what their goals are for the project that you're working on for them. You can set up time to map out what the journey is that they're envisioning for the people using their product, and really just remain aligned so that when the time comes that you are delivering some designs to them, there's no fires that go off, and you can all be fairly aligned with what the expectations are.
Great. All right, yeah, we have another really interesting question where someone asked, did you have any favorite exercises that produced a surprising outcome?
I will speak to my favorite, which was the llama times. And it was featured in the slide deck that we just went over, but it was an exercise where we had people mock up like a newspaper headline of what it would look like. And we were really surprised to just see how creative, all of our teammates were. And it was very well written. And actually, I think from that, like we were able to find like some key moments of like, what does this product actually do? And then we use that into our product roadmap.
I think for me, my favorite was the jobs to be done and opportunities, where we split everyone up and had them map out what their user's journey really was, because it kind of forced you to be confronted with the real pain points that a person is going through and what they actually want to be able to accomplish. I do want to mention that every single one of these activities was made in Figma, because we are largely remote. And so this just made it super easy. We could see what everyone was working on, and it made it so simple to share out after the sprint as well.
Awesome. And then someone else asked, do your product teams work in sprints on an ongoing basis? Did you organize this in addition to regular working sprints?
So our team so the engineering team does do sprints. Actually, on the design side and product, I don't think that we do that. We paired this actually with our annual planning for our team. And then the rest of the time, what we usually do is just make sure that we're aligned pretty closely with engineering, so that by the time they get to their next sprint, it could be like coordinated with where we're at. And that's how we work.
Awesome. And there's also a couple of questions where people wanted to know if you could dive into some of the finer details around approximately how many sessions did you guys have, and also how long were those sessions, and were you focused on trying to time box the activities that you had planned as well?
Yeah, so we were conducting this sprint in December 2021 in order to start brainstorming for 2022 when we were beginning to do planning. And so we did not have all the time in the world. Ideally, we would have loved for it to be an even longer sprint, but we really only had one calendar week in mid-December before everyone went away for Christmas and things like that. So we ended up dividing it up into 4 workshops over the course of the week because everyone was really busy that week. As we said earlier, each session was anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, but never longer than that. And we really organized it in a way that anyone could drop in on any session. They could just go to 2 of the 4 sessions, 1 of the 4 sessions, and they would still be able to participate just as much as anyone who was there for all 4 sessions. So it made it really easy and seamless, and we were able to get so much participation because it wasn't an all or nothing invite. And we got so much out of it. But in the future, if we're not in a time crunch, it would be really great to have something even longer and more focused, and hopefully maybe one day in person.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, let's just answer just a couple more questions. I'm also lumping in a couple with similar themes, but some people were asking about, what recommendations do you have when it comes to organizations that have low UX maturity? And also, are there challenges that you experience when it comes to onboarding non-designers into Figma? Because that was the primary tool it seems that you guys were using, or if you used FigJam as well.
Yeah, I can speak to this. I also tried to throw in a design sprint when I was in a startup. And so you could say that that's like fairly, like not a lot of people knew what design sprint was, didn't really even know what jobs to be done was. So before I ever kind of like nudged or kind of asked or offered the suggestion of a design sprint, I started pretty early on from the very beginning when I went in, which was like, let's talk about these things, like about how design thinks about the work. It's not just about actually like just implementing a design sprint. It's about like often showing people how design thinks and what the value could be. And the truth is it's not just design sprints that we can, that's not the only thing that we could do. And so I did sharing sessions from the very beginning about how to think about jobs to be done, how to give feedback, how to run design crits. And all of these things are very traditionally design stuff. But when you're in like a very low maturity organization or just not a lot of designers, you're going to have to like lean on your other non-designer teammates to really like bring them in and make them almost like your design partners. And so I did a lot of that kind of like foundation setting before design sprint ever came along. And so by that time, there was like enough trust built. And once that kind of like topic was broached, it was like a lot more receptive. And then you just really have to dig into like, what are the concerns that they have? What are the questions that they have? Sometimes it's like, they don't feel like it's attached to a metric, or it's too much time, or they just want to build things that are right away. And so you just have to like figure those things out and then like slowly chip away at those concerns. But trust is like the most important thing from the very beginning.
Mhm. Awesome. All right, let's just ask 2 more questions. There's a couple where they're asking around, how do you organize and coordinate these design sprints, especially for people who are new to this concept? Do you have any kind of advice for that?
And so by that, do you mean scheduling? Do you mean, and I'll answer in terms of scheduling. What's really critical is that in advance of even sending out the invites, you are talking with the people you plan on inviting to the sprint. And so that can go to as little of the details as when is everyone available. So obviously it's better to plan as far in advance as is possible, because then it'll make it a little bit easier to schedule. But for us, we really were in constant communication with our product partners, our engineers, the product marketing partner, operations, anyone that we knew we were going to be including, and we wanted to come to at least one session. And after getting all of those responses, we really were able to schedule a week that worked for everyone, and get a much higher rate of attendance because of that.
Great. All right. One final question. So people were also wondering, what comes next? Is this how your team is going to approach roadmap planning in the future? Are you guys going to be doing this on like a quarterly and yearly basis? And then also people are wondering if you guys are going to make any adjustments or changes in the future to how you're approaching using design sprints for road mapping.
So we've gotten this done. And one of the things that we were really excited about is that our team's like fairly familiar with design sprints now. And one of the things that we're setting this up for is like a broader, just like design longer term vision that one of our teammates is also running. And so we are now at like a baseline of like, here's where our product's at and here's what we're going to be doing for like the next year. And now that we have that out of, like aligned, now we can start to like run a little bit more longer term picture, like 2 years on, and like think about what we actually really want this to be in a more opinionated and like compelling way. And so this has set us up to do a bigger design vision program. And then in terms of day-to-day work, I think we're going to definitely have to like keep doing our roadmap planning and then take the new things that we've learned and then bring it back to this deck, this vision deck that we created, or the synthesis deck that we've created, and start to just like change it up and iterate on it to reflect where we're at any given point in time.
I think also because our design sprint was such a success, and that we were able to incorporate real conversations, but also just have fun, even remotely, it did lay a really nice foundation for the rest of the team, so that now if we bring up the topic of a design sprint again, people are really open to it, even more than they were before this one, because they had such a good experience, and because we left that sprint more aligned. Now we even hear our cross-functional partners say like, oh, when are we going to do the next design sprint? Like, should we do it quarterly? Should we do it annually? So that will also, whatever changes we do make, whenever we host the next design sprint, we will ask for feedback from our partners, but it will make it also significantly easier to schedule it and to invite people and have people attend.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to go through the entire process and share some really great tips and learnings that you guys had in using design sprints as a format to drive planning. For context, we will be sharing out the recordings once it's been posted on our YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for an email on that if you would like to revisit this talk later. Also, we have additional live streams just like this. They're called In the File. So if you're interested in any of them, please take a look at our figma.com/events for any future plans that we have. We also regularly post on our social accounts as well, announcing when we have any upcoming ones. And if you guys have any suggestions or ideas that you'd like to share with our team, please reach out at community@figma.com. One final thing that's also not included in this slide, but we do have our annual conference coming up called Config, and registration is open. So please definitely register. It's going to be for 24 hours. So it's accessible to people all around the world. There's always going to be a presentation going on. So if you do have a couple hours within your day to jump in, please do, but it will also be available later as well for viewing on our YouTube channel. But again, thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, Michie and Talia. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you. Bye.